Hello, everyone. Sid Edmonds. I'm Accenture's U.S. tolling and transportation lead, where I work with our clients and our engagements across the space, including right here in the state of Florida. I want to start by introducing Molly Bowell. Molly is going to present on the topic today is inflection points for electrical vehicles and what that means for Florida and elsewhere. So a little bit on Molly. She runs Accenture's connected energy services right here in North America. She focuses on new utility business models and the plays that electrify everything flexibly and cleanly. She's a recognized thought leader on energy transition and climate, and is a frequent speaker and panelist on subjects such as the one here today. Internally, she leads Accenture's clean energy transition community of practice, where we focus on training, skilling other professionals on the mechanics of what clean tech business models look like, the different types of solutions and services that we offer, including scaling of renewables and the electrification of transportation systems and other pieces of infrastructure. As a strategist and a business transformation leader, she's passionate about and dedicated to designing and driving the triple bottom line solutions that measurably protect the planet from climate change while delivering more and better citizen services. Molly previously worked as a reporter covering energy policy and holds a degree in journalism, political science, and international affairs. She also moonlights as an adjunct professor at George Washington, where she lives, where she's taught storytelling and communications for the past 12 years. Molly, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Sydney. Appreciate it. Team, it's great to meet you, and I'm delighted to chat today about one of my favorite topics, which is electric vehicles. And I love Florida. I love Floridians, despite the fact that I went to the University of Georgia, where we have a superior football team that consistently trounces you guys in the SEC. Not that I'm going to gloat about that, but go Dogs. So with that, let's talk about EVs. Next slide, please. So team, you are well aware that we are at a massive tipping point. This is coming fast, and it's only getting faster with respect to adoption. The numbers are pretty staggering, and you are more than mildly aware of most of these facts and figures that I'm about to reel out. But if anybody told you they knew anything about storage and they had gotten wicked smat on storage and batteries a year ago, their information is likely outdated. The cost of batteries is plummeting. The cost of the supply chains to roll these things out is reaching price parity day by day. It's staggering. We think that we're gonna have more than 30% penetration in the next 10 years, 15 years. And the only thing that's been consistent about our projections on EVs is that we've been consistently wrong. And with what they're calling the Biden bump, which I'm going to talk a lot about in just a second, you're going to see a heck of a lot more. You've got all of these forces colliding at once. You've got the zeitgeist of being present and aware about climate, but you've also got massive divestiture from BlackRock to Carlyle, forcing folks to go green fast and do it at scale. And then you've got all the clear ESG stocks that are just dominating the market right now. I mean, 600% returns on Tesla stock is just staggering. So there's money to be made. This is happening faster than we ever thought it would. And it's all about infrastructure and retrofitting and converting roads. And I'm going to talk to you today about 4 pieces. What is coming down the pipe from a funding perspective that is a generational infusement of cash and capital into electric vehicles and the infrastructure. I'll talk about the broad plan, but specifically what we have high confidence is going to pass and be available to folks like you and your organizations in the near future. Then I talk about the engagement of customers. How do you get them to your chargers? How do you make that a fulfilling experience that can be more than just the kilowatt commodity that you're selling or the margin that you put on top of that charging experience? What does that look like, and what needs to be true for you to be successful in that game? And then who are all the mix of players? It's dizzyingly complex. So who are the chargers? Are they closed systems? Are they open systems? What does that even mean for you? And then how to select those partners. So who are the cats and the cast of characters, and then how to wrangle them and herd them in the direction that you want to go, right? So it's kind of, as we were joking, a grab bag of EV topics, but there's a through line in terms of the monies that are coming and the experience that you need to make true and the partners that you need to steward against a plan to go make these things happen, because there is an urgency of now. As you are aware, I'm told you are aware, per Brady and our prep work here, transportation is the #1 source of emissions. You know that. Every time you drive a mile in an ICE vehicle, the NOx and SOx coming off the tailpipe of that vehicle are going to stay hovering above the atmosphere, creating a warming effect, creating bad news bears for everybody. There's a lot of good news stories on the other side of electrification and alternative fuel vehicles, whether or not hydrogen ever fully scales. But today we're going to be focused on the BEV story here. So a couple of stats around the page. I said there's going to be more than 33% penetration by 2040. For perspective, I'm sure most of you are aware, we got 2% today. So that is a pretty meteoric rise, pretty World War II-like mobilization in a fairly short amount of time. We project a $2 trillion market in e-mobility by 2040 across North America and Europe, and that's all of the extra kilowatts. That's the actual kit for the cars. So automakers, oil majors getting into this game, the charging experiences, the rates you charge, all of that. 2 trillion. We're looking at, most recently, our market assessment, about 100 billion of that being spent in North America in the next 3 years. It's a lot of additional infusement of market movement, and it is good news for those who want to be in this game. A couple of quick stats just to put a finer point on it, and I am told that many of you are aware of these things. It's just really fun to say. So General Motors is pushing out more than 30 new EV models in the next 4 years. They're doing just shy of a $30 billion investment. That is phenomenal. Tesla's looking to have a $25,000 car. Right now, they've got about a $32,000 to $35,000 Model 3 available, and they want to do that in the next 3 years. All right, so the average cost of a car is hovering around $30K, and so they're looking to dip under that, making the price parity just fairly compelling for that amount of range. Volvo is going to be a fully electric company in the next 9 years. That's stunning. Amazon spent $1 billion on Rivian to put 100,000 electric vans on the street in the next decade. Fun fact, I wound up delivering Amazon packages about 3 weeks ago because I was doing a site tour of a local Amazon factory trying to figure out where and how to put electric vehicle infrastructure in the city. I'm just outside of DC. I'm in Alexandria, Virginia. And so they strapped on a vest, and I drove an Amazon vest, and I drove some vehicles. It was so much fun. FedEx forecasts that all of its vehicles are going to be electric or net zero by 2025. So just the list goes on. It's staggering the amount of folks getting into this game and making real commitments that go way beyond greenwashing. They are converting their supply chains, they're converting their warehouses, they're converting their factories. These things are on the market and they're being demanded, now. So obviously, big story for you guys is what to do with the infrastructure and where to put the chargers. My understanding from the prep work here is that you're primarily focused on what's called level 3 charging, which is the fast charging. So things that will be on a turnpike, things that will be on a highway, not the level 2 that you could find at your workplace or find at a mall. And so that's where we're gonna talk about. But before we talk about that, let me get into part 1 of the 4-part dance I talked about. And that is, what on earth is happening with this generational trillions of dollars, being thrown around in talks about the American Jobs Plan? What happened to the AJP? Where is it? When is it going to hit? And what of that is relevant to you good folks on the line? Okay. Lots of things happening on the left but on the left here, you see the original pitch of 2.2 trillion, which was the original American Jobs Plan, right? That has gone through political machinations. It's been battered around by the stewards from the White House, making pitches for bipartisanship and compromises and cuts to the original ambition. And we now see the AJP not quite put aside, but reimagined in parallel track bills, right? On one hand, we have a $1.2 $2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure framework. Bipartisan infrastructure framework, AKA the BIF. I will not call it the BIF because that's just silly. So we'll call it the framework. But we have high confidence, as in more than 80% confidence, that which primarily focuses on surface infrastructure and strips away a lot of the social spending that the Democrats wanted in that original AJP, that is going to pass in some form or fashion in the very near future, and mostly in the same form or fashion as is constituted today. The real and only hangups that you see with the framework now is how to pay for it, and a little bit about water infrastructure, which is not material to our conversation here today. I'll unpack that and what's inside that in just a moment, but we expect that by the end of this month, we are going to see some level of agreement on that package. The end of this month is coming very, very, very soon, as in like next week. And in parallel, there is a reconciliation bill. I'll unpack that and talk about that in just a bit. It has significant and fundamental implications for EV investment and EV infrastructure investment, germane to your level 3 charging ambitions that I understand that you have. We expect that the framework is going to be debated and rolled around in up until mid-August, wherein Congress will take a recess and we'll come back, and by end of fiscal, we expect to see this pass with strong confidence that funds will flow as soon as fall. And I'll talk a little bit about what is in and what is outside of that in just a sec. But the so what on this page here is that if you take a look at the bottom chevrons, all right, and against that timeline, the implication is that those who have a plan for what is needed in terms of infrastructure spending aligned to what they think is coming down the pike, and I'm going to give you some more fidelity about what we think that looks like, all right, are far more apt to successfully bid for those funding dollars than those who don't have a plan and don't have a perspective. This is going to be a cross-functional, cross-industry collaboration for the most part. I'll explain why in just a moment, but this is not single private companies bellying up to the bar. This is public-private, or this is channeled through states and municipalities and then distilled down to the private sector. And so having a perspective about how you want to tap into these funds, how you're going to demonstrate that these funds have some amount of environmental impact or social impact that helps low and marginal income communities and frontline communities is going to be the recipe for success here. But having a perspective on that now, today, and then getting organized and orchestrating your partnerships and your plans needs to happen ASAP. Let's go to the next one, Chris, and I'll start to do the unpacking as I explained, or as I promised. So this is a staggering amount of money, even cut nearly in half. Staggering. We are talking about the bipartisan framework, and I haven't even talked about the reconciliation bill. I will get to that in just a moment, but we are talking about 7 times greater than that which was passed in 2008 and 9 for the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act era. All right, 7 times greater with respect to the proposed spending on infrastructure and energy. If you talk about the whole package, it's more than 50% greater. It's a staggering amount and a generational investment in hardening our infrastructure to be more resilient, to be more reliable, to be cleaner, and to be more equitable. And that is part and parcel of the Biden administration's commitment to going net zero by 2050. All right. The key differences between what was passed in 2009 in era and now that's being put on the table, again, that we have high confidence of passing, is that there is a shift in emphasis from shovel ready to shovel worthy. All right. This is an 8-year proposed spending package. So it won't just be an infusion of cash in the here and now, and then you fall off a cliff. It is over time. And so they are looking at projects that help revitalize infrastructure and invest in clean technology to achieve those 2050 net zero goals. There's going to be a greater expectation for qualified labor as the labor market is becoming much, much tighter. So qualified labor means there's an expectation that the wages are going to meet federal standards and federal stipulations for funding. We see such a tightness in the market right now. We anticipate that the utility industry is going to be 30% understaffed by 2025. At the same time that we need to literally triple the amount of electricity to meet the demand of the electrify everything movement of buildings, of transit to stay under 2 degrees of warming. And so this is the time to partner with your energy providers, your utility partners, your charging partners to come up with a plan for the kinds of cash and capital that you need so that you can get ahead of talent shortfalls and funding that's going to be needed to really, really move with urgency. And lastly, I mentioned it before, but the difference between now and 2009 is there's a greater emphasis on prioritizing projects that demonstrate social improvements. So promoting racial equity, reducing the impacts of climate change, and creating good paying jobs. And that's going to be key to who gets approved for these, that you can walk the cat backwards and demonstrate that your projects have those tangible outcomes that are going to be fundamental to the selection criteria. Okay. Let's dig in a little more to what's on the table. And I am going to get to the reconciliation piece, but let's go to the next one, Chris. And so this unpacks the breakdown of what is on the table for the framework. You see that there is $579 billion in new spending that's going to be coupled with what was residual spending not yet tapped, the $631 billion that was still on the table that Congress had previously authorized for 8 years of funding. So we're looking at the left side of this ledger for the breakdown and what's relevant to you, right? And that clearly is the EV aspects here. On the one hand, you got $7.5 billion for the electrification of transit. So those are school and public buses, and then $7.5 billion for EV infrastructure. We're talking about the actual trenching, running power, running conduit, actually creating make-ready infrastructure, procuring the actual hardware for the chargers to create those level 3 chargers. It's not exclusive to level 3, it's level 2 as well, but the charging infrastructure that's public is what we're talking about here. All right, so that's the breakdown in the framework here. Let's move to the next one, and I'll show you kind of a compare contrast. There is a stupid amount on this slide, so don't get blind yourself by trying to read it all at once. The point is I wanted to compare on the left, those things just in purple, all right, are those things in the framework that we expect to pass at generally those funding levels that are relevant to you. Now, why did I highlight more than just EVs? Brady was in our pre-work here explaining that many in this constituency on the line here care a whole heck of a lot about the resiliency of any kind of charging infrastructure or just the surface infrastructure that you run, you manage, you maintain. And resiliency is a significant part of this funding. And that's going to be both for public and private actors to tap into. Whereas the EV funds are going to be channeled, we think, if it's anything like ARA, primarily through DOE and DOT. So lots for Mayor Pete to do at Department of Transportation. And those will then be allocated down to state and municipalities to coordinate with their grid authorities and their energy providers on where to site and place public infrastructure. Resiliency is more of a public-private dance. And we're talking about a combination of hardening infrastructure when we talk about resiliency from a physical infrastructure, but also from a cyber infrastructure. And both of those have implications clearly for the electric charging network. And then you want to make sure that that is powered by clean and green. And so you're looking at your power infrastructure here. So the point is, again, these are the kinds of funds that are coming down. What is right and relevant for you in your charging ambitions, and who is your ecosystem of partners with whom you need to collaborate now to start making the right and requisite plans that show how you're meeting the KPIs of social justice, climate justice, clean and green charging, right, to achieve your goals, but also to tap into these funds. Now, let's talk about the reconciliation package just a little bit. from the 2.2 initial AJP American Jobs Plan down to what it is now, the 1.2 billion, all right? That was stripped out, and a lot of what got stripped out is being put right back into the reconciliation package from a physical infrastructure perspective, but it's also being complemented with what the Biden infrastructure, or the Biden team's calling the human infrastructure piece of that. And I grayed out those pieces. It's less relevant to you here, but there are additional pieces of funding for EV infrastructure that are going to be in the reconciliation bill. We think it's a high probability that the reconciliation package is going to pass. It's just a function of what gets passed, right? The clean energy standard might get pulled out of that if we don't see all parties stacking hands on that, but we do think a significant portion of the infrastructure investments that you might be interested in will also linger in that piece as well. So, but we'll know in very short order because we won't have a lot of time to think about this. We're going to go, we're already starting to see this move to the Senate floor by the end of this week, and they'll roll around in it through the first 2 weeks of August. So you will not have long to sit and wait, but you also need to be urgently moving towards a plan if you're planning on tapping these funds. All right, Chris, let's move to the next one. And this is going to be my second to last piece, the penultimate on what's happening with EVs. And I think the big so what is you see the evolution that I've just walked you through from the original AJP bucket of funding for e-mobility specifically down to the tranche it's at now. So that's the far right piece of it. And you've got that $15 billion. That's a mix of electrification of the actual vehicles for school buses, public transit, and the $7.5 billion for your public infrastructure funding. Now, with that, there is an expectation that 500,000 chargers are going to be funded there. So it went from, you had 15 billion to do 500,000 chargers to half of that to do 500,000 chargers. But that being said, it's still money that's going to be vital to rolling this out and rolling this out with alacrity. So I think that's the last there. Well, maybe one more thing on that. It's going to just be so essential that you work with your utilities to get this done. We are seeing in some cases where we've got higher penetration. There's only a few pockets in the United States where you've got pockets of penetration over 2%, where you have got massive, as in over a year delay in your interconnect for some of your larger make-ready infrastructures. So over a year delay after you've already committed to making the charge point happen, just for the make ready, because of the permitting, because of the supply chain. Some of the supply chain things were mostly choked because of COVID. That's unwinding a bit, but you still have significant delays, and you've got a lot of utilities pounding the table to get charging plans locked down a decade ahead of time so that they can upgrade the feeders, so they can place the right and requisite transformers in place. And these things take time to trench it, to bring the power. And so the more you can be working here today with your utilities on smoothing these very rough edges, the better for you, for drivers, you name it. Okay. One last piece, I promise, on the infrastructure package, and then we're going to race right along. So let's go to the next one, Chris. And that is going to be, how are these funds going to be distributed? So we're going to see a lot of it being your direct allocation to states. That's where the lion's share of the things that you care about is going to be coming from. And so it'll be DOT or DOE, probably more Mayor Pete than Secretary Granholm, going to states and then down into transit authorities and public operators of charge points. So without draining a lot of this, there will be a mix of some loans, a mix of some grants. A lot of it will be pure grants, and those will be stringent criteria for shovel-worthy against those KPIs we talked about. There will also be some co-investment for P3 in certain cases. So you'll see a mix. This is effectively, we're looking at the ARA playbook. This is nothing new or different than what we saw. It's just a function of scale right now and what's getting tax credits for EVs. Okay, let's move right along. to our next piece. So Brady indicated that many of you are thinking about the partnership considerations for charging owners and charging operators and how to actually put chargers in the ground, how to make sure that they're resilient. And I asked, well, are these folks on the line thinking about the customer, right? And the answer was absolutely, 100%. But it's not the primary focus of a lot of the discussions happening right now, which is more around the hardware and the operations. And I wanted to take the moment to pull the lens back and make an urgent and selfish plea. Let's go to the next one, Chris. To absolutely keep the customer at the top of the line when you are designing these charging experiences, when you are thinking about what is the wraparound of the charging experience. How do people even know where your chargers are? What happens when they get to the charger? Do they understand how long it's going to take to charge? Do you provide that information? Does your partner provide that information? Is it going to be available just because you've got a charger? How do you know this? Are you planning on outsourcing that kind of information through some level of telematics back to the driver, right? There is, the reason I raise this is, as Sydney said in the introduction, I work primarily with utilities, and we are seeing more and more convergence happening as automakers and oil majors race into the e-mobility field, as BP buys up some of the largest EV charging networks across the UK, as your oil majors are trying to get into the electrify everything game, which is stunning, but they know where the puck is going. And so it seems to us across these convergence of industries in the e-mobility play that no one is owning the customer education. Range anxiety is real, even though it shouldn't be so real, because the average driver, as I'm sure most folks on this call know, doesn't do more than 40 miles a day, right? But customers don't know that. My mom on the far right always says, oh yeah, but if I use my EV, what is it going to do to my battery? You keep wanting me to get an EV, but if I charge it, it's going to run down my battery. And what if I run down my battery before I run down my car? All right. My mom is a deep South Southerner, which is why she has such a Southern accent. So these things are real and pressing every time we poll our potential ICE drivers in terms of their fear and what's holding them back. We're going to achieve cost parity. I hit that at the top, but who is owning these other pieces? And are you owning the education? Are you touting where the Electric Highway Coalition might be citing their public charging infrastructure to make sure you've got the ability to drive from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I'm a Baton Rouge native, all the way up to Charleston, South Carolina in a seamless way with their EV. So I just want to put it on the top of your minds that the customer education is fundamental, and all of our clients are doing this when it comes to who's in charge of that. Our utilities expect that our customers already have an EV. Our automakers expect that our drivers already understand what a time of use rate is or managed charging. Our charging companies just figure everybody's already figured everything else out and they're just coming for that session. So working with your partners to try to lower those barriers is going to really accelerate adoption and moreover, use of your particular charging and charging networks. Okay, let's go to the next one. I just want to hit briefly that fleets are obviously less in number than your residential drivers, and just in terms of like the number of fleet owners versus the number of light duty residential drivers, but they represent the heaviest load and some of the most complication here. And they are going through massive machinations and overwhelming decision making right now to figure out whether, when, and how to convert. And so there's a ton on this page, and that's not the point. I don't want you to go blind trying to read all this stuff. I'm trying to give you the overwhelming sense that there's a lot of questions coming at fleet owners right now, and almost no one is a single point answering those questions. There's no one front door that they can walk in and say, great, well, turns out I am a major retail logistics provider, and I either bring, meat or furniture up and down the eastern corridor or across the southern corridor. Am I going to have dedicated charging, or do I have to build depots everywhere? Right? When I get to a public, fast charger system, are you going to be able to? Am I going to be able to reserve a space? because I'm there every single day, day after day, in the same window, and I've got these kind of duty cycles for charging. Are you going to support that? And are you going to hammer me with peak demand charges when I get there? All right. Are you even thinking about peak demand charges? Are you just thinking about the infrastructure? And so how are you helping and working with your business partners get over the hump of adoption? It is for the automakers to figure out whether or not the tractors and trailers are going to be available in time. It's for the fleet operators to work with those OEMs to figure out how to do the driver education. But what are you guys doing to make sure that you're partnering with your business community or your industrial community to make sure that there are consistent corridors at reasonable rates that they can rely upon for those opportunity charging, or even if it's beyond opportunity, if it's scheduled charging, what are you doing to make that available, right? Because it is a huge concern for a lot of operators. Okay, let's move to the next one. I am now stepping down off my soapbox. Please and thank you for working with your ecosystem partners on customer education. Okay, just want to give you a snapshot. Many of you may be aware of the Florida dynamics of what's out there with respect to charging. My understanding is that you're really only focused on the fast charging, the DCFC pieces, of which we have about 20,000 in these United States. So again, going back to what we think is a high probability of the 14 billion in EV infra being allocated in the framework package, 7.5 billion of that being for 500,000 new charging stations, and then some mix of that 500,000 new charging stations being fast charging and level 2 charging. There's going to be a lot of emphasis on the fast charging to really get over, the multi-state corridor range anxiety questions and concerns. And moreover, what are you doing to coordinate with your fellow business owners or transit authority operators to make sure that you are intelligently placing your fast charging networks up and down the state so that you're not doing, 2 chargers within 10 miles of each other and that there's some level of space between them, but not too much, in a way that also doesn't congest the grid and blow up feeders and transformers. Okay. So that was just a little level set on what we've got, what we think we're going to need as we hit that 33% penetration in the next handful of years. Let me shift quickly, and I sure hope this is helpful. Maybe Sydney, Brady, someone come offline if like the comments in the field, if there are any comments in the field, say this lady is off base or I'd like to hear more of. I'm more than happy to be flexible on the fly, but. Barring objection, I'm going to tell you about the mix of boys and girls in this field and how you should be thinking about partnerships. So within EV charging, this is the primary cast of characters, and the owners of each of these could be your classic utilities, they could be private companies, they could be oil and gas majors, they could be cities, right? But these are the kinds of functions that are provided. So from a charge point perspective, and many of you may know this, but it's important for where I'm about to go. So allow me exposition to get to climax. So this is the left to right here. When I say charge point operator, I'm talking about the actual physical charger with cables that plug into your vehicle, right? Whether or not that's light duty, heavy duty, doesn't matter. That's the CPO. Your e-mobility service provider, what we call EMSPs, okay, are the ones doing the back-end billing, the telematics, the folks who say you've got X amount of kilowatts coming into your battery. I'm sending you signals to your battery to say I'm going to slow the charge here, and it's communicating back and forth across a whole bank of chargers or across networks of chargers to give you the billing and the grid intelligence. The ISP is the protocol that they're using. That's less important here. Aggregators we don't really have in the United States at scale. There are some emerging rules out of FERC, for those of you who want to geek out, 2222A, that will allow certain aggregators to take load off of vehicles and bundle it into markets where those markets are available and sell that on the exchange. That is emerging. That's going to happen likely in the next 5 years with some level of penetration. We've only seen just shreds of it here. Your electric supplier is either your classic utility or maybe a multinational, but regardless who's providing the juice into the car. and then your technology players, which I'm going to dig into in a little bit. Now, why on earth was that important to know? Because the way you engage these different folks matters for your revenue, for customer control, for intelligence, and for scalability. All right. I'll explain in just a moment. I will quickly note that in the United States, most CPOs, charge point operators, and e-mobility service providers are one and the same. All right, ChargePoint is at the same time the folks who are doing the telematics, the back-end billing, as well as providing the kit and the hardware to do that charging, okay? Where you see a lot more fragmentation in other markets, especially Europe, okay? So Chris, let's go to the next one and I'll start to explain why on earth that's important. So here's just a quick look at the value chain of charging. So you got the things that are being produced at the left from both the cars, the batteries, all the way to where it gets to be interesting in your world, all right, where it starts to be relevant for you at the actual charging station development. Who is actually doing the siting? Who is doing the interconnect? Who's doing the make ready? Who is guaranteeing that that hardware has uptime and has 99% charging availability? Who is working the warranties or the service level agreements? If you've got a charge point operator, are you relying on them to go and make sure that it's running and humming? Okay, or is that a third-party contract? Who owns that? Okay, dealing with the pricing. Do you have flexibility of pricing, or is your grid operator setting pricing and peak demand? How are you avoiding peak demand charges to make sure you're not blowing up feeders? Who's doing the billing, particularly if you're going billing across lots of different chargers? All right. And then is there any kind of V1G demand charging that throttles backload? All right. We're not in a V2G world quite yet where you can pull juice from the battery and actually send it back into the grid as a grid service. We're not quite there yet. There's lots of models that are emerging, but not at scale yet. Of course, the boys and girls at left, Tesla and Rivian, can move all the way down that value chain, right? Which you see here. But then you've got folks just focused on certain pieces of that value chain, whether or not that's the hardware or the e-mobility service provision. In the United States, you see the boys and girls like Electrify America, like the Blinks, doing all of the above. And then from a tech platform, those can be agnostic and ride herd over a whole host of different charge points. And I'll explain why that's important, particularly if you guys are thinking about operating multiple charge points in different areas. I'll give you a sense of some of those trade-offs and considerations in just a bit. Okay, let's move to the next one. Now that I'm getting super, super wonky on you, I will make it less wonkish by waving my jazz hands and giving you some spirit fingers here. All right, so for our next dig into this, when you are thinking about setting up the aspects and the tech stack of charging, right? Presuming that you are a transit authority or you are a toll operator or a gas station operator with lots of potential for level 3 charging, right? These are the aspects functionally and technically that you need to have checked off either through your partner or through your own internal operations. So as you're thinking about your operational model and you're thinking about what needs to be true to make these things come to life, from your identification of a charger to the billing and charging session to identification of what kind of fuel type it is it green? Is it not green? Do you have any insight at all? Do you need to throttle that load across the bank of chargers? All of those controls, this is kind of the play of making sure from a customer care perspective, you've got some level of a mobile application, letting the driver know what's available, where they should turn left, for how long they need to charge. It's a charge point order fulfillment, the ability to request the charge, the ability to see any kind of tech support at the press of your thumb here if the charger's not there. So what are you doing for customer care? From a bill or a rate perspective, what are you doing for tariff management? All right, what are you doing for the clearing and settlement of those payments? What are the payment methods and the channels that you're using? How are you reimbursing folks if you incentivize them to charge at this site versus that site, right? Are you giving them a private charging rate if they are a business customer or a fleet operator? that's come into your level 3 chargers on the regular, do they have a preferential rate? Do they charge for free? All right. Is their juice always green? What are you doing to manage that? And then from a device management perspective, how do you know the health and the integrity of that actual system? So remote management, any kind of resolution of issues virtually, or sending a signal to your field service technicians and monitoring that progress. How do you provision? How do you decommission? So what are you guys doing to think through those things? Are you outsourcing all of those to a partner? Is that something that you're going to absorb as a core capability of your organizations? From a charging section perspective, you need to do something to authenticate drivers. You need to do something to allow reservation of charge points or not. Do you authorize the transactions? How do you manage all of the historical data and get some insights about when folks are coming and how might you add additional chargers or throttle load at certain times? What is your insight and analytics engine for that? So anyway, I will not dig in too deeply, but these are all the kinds of functional things that need to be true, and you can make them true through a different range of partners that have different implications in terms of what you own, what you outsource, how you control the customer. And I'm going to talk super briefly about that, and then we are going to open it up and see whether or not you've passed out from boredom, if this is mildly interesting and engaging. So let's go to the next one, Chris. So super briefly, putting it all into play. I mentioned all of these folks do different things. So without lingering too long, you can see the brand and logos of the kinds of different operators across this exchange, this logical exchange, from providing the juice to providing the charging session to providing any kind of telematics about the billing, right, and the device management to the actual customer end use. Now, I mentioned roaming very briefly because there is this new notion or this new coalition called the Electric Highway Coalition across Florida, Georgia, and four other states to make a unified level 3 charging corridor so that folks could seamlessly go from Charleston to New Orleans as needed. We don't yet have roaming in the United States where you could have a singular RFID card or a singular, account authentication. That's coming. That's in pockets across things like the Electrify America network, but it's not yet ubiquitous. We think it's going to become ubiquitous in about 5 years' time. Okay, let's go to the next one. So I think I will not linger on this in terms of how the monies flow in terms of billability, but this is a quick snapshot of who's doing what and how you would select certain partners to do what. I think I'm going to linger instead on why you would choose certain partners over another, but this kind of gives you that picture that I just showed you kind of in reverse from the customer perspective of how they engage and who's their front end. So I'm gonna move past this so that we can get to some of the more thornier considerations. So let's move to the next slide, Chris. Utilities are your partners, okay? They have to be your partners. No one else is going to do make ready, right? Unless you go an off-grid solution where you bring in a microgrid, on-site generation, storage, and you kind of skip the classic feeder being 100% of your juice, which you absolutely can. We just had an example of that in Montgomery County, Maryland, where a new joint venture between the Carlisle Group and Schneider Electric, who is doing charging as a service and infrastructure energy as a service, just helped a big bus depot go electric, right? Every ounce of that depot is covered in solar. You could absolutely do that. That being said, irrespective of whether or not you go microgrid or not, you still have a utility partner, and utilities are trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up in the EV game right now. And they're evaluating the plays and the value of just doing rates, just stopping at make-ready infrastructure, or going all the way into charging as a service where they would own and operate certain of the kit and certain of the hardware, all right? Regardless, they are going to be your partners. You need to engage them early and often. They are absolutely fundamental to this mix, and they want to help. They want to lean in and help you. So find them, talk to them, hug them, love them, talk to them. All right, let's go to the next and talk about your considerations for charging partnerships. And this is the last thing that I'm going to leave you with. I think about this as whether or not you are an Apple or an Android person. Okay? Do you like something that is gorgeous? It is seamless. It is super, super intuitive, as I show you my Apple, my iPhone here, and you don't have to think about it, right? It's a closed system. They're not going to allow me to play with the interface other than just a few modifications, but it's nothing affecting code. Or Android, where you've got more wonkish folks who really want to, play with gears and customize things. It gives you more control. It's a little harder of a lift, whereas one is turnkey, it's super simple. And the Android is going to require and foist upon you some technical capabilities, or require of you those technical capabilities. Okay, why is that relevant to a charger? So as you move forward and try to think about closed systems in kind of a service model, like as a charge point operator or e-mobility service provider would give you, the future looks more like a decision between Amazon, right? Also an analog to the Apple closed system, right? It immediately gives you scale. It absolutely allows you to do beautiful things, but you do not own the platform, right? The platform owns the customer relationship, right? I go to my Amazon to go and get my coffee. I go to Amazon to go and get my gardening equipment. It's not the customer of the gardening equipment store. They're the ones who've got my data. Versus Shopify, where I can use Shopify to create unique storefronts where I'm owning the customer and I'm just using it as a vehicle to go engage. All right, how on earth is that relevant to charging? And let me talk about charging models. Go to the next one, Chris. And I'm gonna wrap quickly. Okay, you have to make a decision, toot sweet, as you were thinking about level 3 charging, about whether or not you want a closed or an open system. Period, paragraph, step 1. Do you want a closed system that allows charging within that system and mostly only within that system? I say mostly only because Tesla and Rivian are modifying slightly. All right. It is turnkey. They provide the charger. It is compatible with that vehicle. All right. They provide the back-end billing. It is super simple to use, and it is going to require you to only use that. Versus an open system, so follow me in my branch down here, okay, where you then have to ask yourself, well, I want an open system that lots of different cars and charging operators could work within. All right, well, do I want to own the customer relationship, right? Or do I want to outsource that? If you want to outsource that, you go to the charge points of the world, all right? You've got an e-mobility service provider and a charge point operator all rolled up into one. It's fairly turnkey to use. They're going to set the charging rates. They're going to escalate those charging rates without your ability to control that, because you are going to be using that almost as a service, okay? Certainly the e-mobility service provider part of the service, okay? If you want to have the customer relationship that you own, then you're going to go more towards a drive or a green flux. This is going to require you to configure, going to set up. You've got to plug that over the top of charge points, so you can plug in lots of different charge points to that. And that's more of the Shopify model, where you can set the rates, you control the engagement, and the customer has a relationship with you versus someone else. Now, you can white label that if you want to whatever you want. It's basically a software that allows you to set the charging instances, the rates, manage the uptime, and the kit over a lot of different vendors, where you have ultimately at the end of the day the ability to change out charge point operators if you want and still maintain the customer relationship, versus you cannot do that in that box just above the bottom. Okay, so that's a bit of a consideration for you. I'm going to finish with the following. Chris, let's go to the last. Okay, Chris, just make this build out and I will talk over it. Here's the so what. Partner, have a plan to find the right partners, engage your utilities, and then figure out what is shovel worthy with respect to tapping into what we expect to be a significant amount of funds, at the very least from the framework funding that's coming down the pike, monies which will be released, some of it as early as the fall. All right, so how do you want to partner to educate your customers, both resi and fleet operators, or resi and business, I should say? Where do you want to work with respect to utilities in terms of accelerating make ready and interconnect, or working with them to avoid peak demand charges? Where do you want to work with your charge point operators to just outsource the ownership of customers and have them continuously do the uptime and the refresh? Or do you want to own some level of the hardware control or some level of the software control? I imagine a lot of you are already far down this path, but my point is more than anything else, this is the ultimate convergence play, EVs, talking about hardware and software and electricity all at once. And it's going to require a relatively new mix of people coming together to think thoughtfully about this. So I hope this was informative, helpful. I'd be more than happy to field any questions you might have if you have them. So thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. And I can't see any questions, so you're just going to have to tell me what's what, Sydney.
Yeah, thanks, Molly, and thank you again to Brady and the team, Florida, for letting us have to share this presentation today. So we had a few questions come in, and before we do that, I want to remind everyone to go ahead and please put your questions in the Q&A box. We will get to them provided we have time. So let's start with, so the first, there's a couple of these that are kind of related, Molly, so I'll put this out there. So Kyle Taylor asked, how far are we from the ability to charge an EV while driving? I have read about in-road charging capabilities and how that will impact our roadways. And the related question was, what are the roadblocks you see on creating the needed electrical charging network for today?
So if you're talking about the ability to move around in city, which is more level 2 than level 3, we have got that now. 90% of charging is done at home. And if you are an EV driver, even if you're plugging into the wall, the average commute is less than 40 miles a day. So you're going to be satisfied whether or not, even if you're doing a level 1, which is just a 120 volt, it's what's powering my lamp right there. But most is level 2, 240. Level 3 is what most of you are interested in, and that's still going to be opportunity or the occasional travel, unless for work you are traveling on the regular, and that's such a small subset. Most of the market is dominated by high range vehicles today, like your Teslas, and so those have more than a 250 mile range, and so you've already got that. Now for mass adoption, where you don't actually need the whole 250 range, they're coming out with the cheaper car that I mentioned, which has a shorter range at a cheaper price point, because not everybody needs to go that far on the daily. In terms of highway charging, so the ability to actually charge wirelessly, that is not something that we see scaling anytime soon. You've got some demonstration projects that haven't really ever gone beyond demonstration. There are wireless level 2 chargers that are happening in public spaces. A lot of workplaces have them. They haven't charged as fast. They haven't scaled as fast, and I don't expect them to in the near future. But if anyone has alternative details, let me know. Always interested in varying the variables of insight here. It's just not something that we see scaling.
Thanks, Molly. Here's another question we had. So do you think it is a big risk to assume that a substantial portion of the funding for this new infrastructure will need to come from the private sector, going back to where you're laying out the funds, I think. So
I think it's a real opportunity. I think that a substantial portion of the infrastructure is going to come. Let me back up. There are a ton of our major clients who are some of the largest corporations on the planet looking at as a service. Loads of folks are thinking about as a service. And when you think about oil and gas majors who are just really good at operating infrastructure, or utilities whose job is to operate infrastructure, you see a lot of transferable knowledge and skills when you're talking about operating those CPOs, the charge points. it's unclear whether or not public regulators, legislators are going to allow utilities to get into this game at scale. Where we see utilities being allowed to get into this scale, get into this game is largely where you've got low and moderate income or EJ, environmental justice concerns, where utilities can get into that mix. And I'm going to the point of who's allowed to, in a utility, rate base and spend capital. So that's private market, and they want to. That's how utilities make money. Other folks look at this as a money-making game because they want to invest in the money. So there is a willingness and an eagerness for them to spend that cash and capital, because then they have lock-in of that customer base. They have lock-in of the revenue every time you have a charging session. So do I see it as a risk? I see it as a huge opportunity. And I do see there's going to be an exponential value of federal funding. For every $1 in federal funding, there is a equivalent of $6 capital market growth, right? So it's just, that's been the consistent infrastructure equation. So I see it as an amplifying effect.
Great. We've got 2 left. We've got about 3 minutes, so we'll see if we can get to both of them. Steve Morello asks, thanks for confirming my suspicions on the EV take-up forecast. Given that the forecasts are only consistently wrong, what is your optimistic view of a take-up by 2035, given that I believe the 33% is low?
I believe that 33% is low as well. I had to go with the more conservative one. Did you guys see the e-Hummer ad with LeBron James? And then did you see the Ford F-150 Lightning? It's unbelievable. It's got more than 12, I think it's got 14 charge points. Don't quote me directly on that, but like plugs, and it's a 240 charger. That is culturally breaking the mold. That is like creating the zeitgeist of the middle America, working America. Every single contractor on my street has a Ford F-150. I mean, it is just that kind of accessibility. And they, by the way, sold out for 3 years. And by the way, GM is not allowing a single dealer to sell the e-Hummers for the next 2 years because they don't want dealers to screw it up. They're just doing direct sales, just like Tesla, just like Rivian, direct to customer, because there's such an ambition and such a desire to have that. I feel like we've had a cultural tipping point that's going to go a lot faster. And I sure as heck hope we get higher adoption. The sticking point is going to be the infrastructure. It's going to be the infrastructure. We're seeing more than a year delay in the North New England in terms of level 3 charging, the ability to interconnect, the ability to actually just have the kit to roll that out. So we've got to solve the infrastructure piece.
Thanks. The last one here that's in the chat box is Rich Butala asks, any concerns about the disposal of all of these EV batteries once spent?
Yes. 100%. That is a concern. Is it worse for the environment than driving an ICE vehicle? Hell no. Obviously not. Right. But there's definitely something that NREL, whole armies of R&D are taking a look at in terms of how do we upcycle. Tesla is announcing a new version of its lithium battery just for the recycling purposes. It's for more efficient storage, but also how do we reuse, recycle, upcycle some of these pieces, and that's something that's still in process. But also, I mean, the story of batteries is a story of constant exponential change, just in terms of the price plummeting and what we can do with them. So I'm bullish. We're going to figure something out.